Sometimes if you want to catch great big giant fish on a fly rod, you've got to use great big giant flies. It's easy to tie big flies, but it's not usually very easy to cast them. I'm going to show you a little trick on how to make big flies that are actually reasonable to cast. This is .030 beading wire. There are many different kinds of wire available. You want to find a strong, fairly thin, flexible, not a real boing boing type wire. I also use sometimes a galvanized steel. Anyway, first thing is to bend it over. I've got a little pair of vice grips here that I've actually taken little pads of rubber and just glued to the surface of them. And you don't have to do that, but it's a little safety measure, as you'll see. I'm going to clamp them like that. And I bent this so it's pretty much even, but just to make sure that it's similar, I've hook it on my drill, and you'll notice in the drill got just a screw eye that's open a little bit, and its diameter is the diameter that I want when I build my loop-to-loops on this big fly that we're going to make. Now, one of the tricks, if not the main element, in making really big flies that are not so difficult to cast is to pick materials that don't absorb water. They call it hydrophobic. This is big fly fiber. It's a very fine, high-grade nylon. And I've got another material here that we call Supreme here. I actually call it the bodybuilder, and you'll see why in a minute. I wouldn't necessarily have to do the step I'm going to do now, but for me, it just they come out better this way, and it's easier. This is some kind of goo, and it's not the same as shoe goo. Walther's goo, and there's a lot of different rubberized quick dry adhesives that'll work for this. What I'm going to do is put a little dab of it on here, a little dab, and just sort of, and I'm not squeezing it all in the tube, I'm just pulling this little dab along. And it gets kind of goofy at the end when you want to get rid of it. It doesn't like to let go, but you just sort of, and it doesn't matter if it's just perfect, but you're going to see it'll help just keep everybody where they should be. And he's semi-glued to the table here, but that's okay. It's best to have him suspended off the table just a little bit. Now, I've pre-blended this. This is a bunch of big fiber, different colors. And what I've done is mixed it together and just taken a brush like this, and you kind of comb it and suck some Flashabou in here, which is better done later. I'm getting that all combed out. And I could just use a variety of different colors. I could do, any combination. I'm going to go like so. If I make it this long, it means that the fibers will stick out each side. So I'm going to do something like that, and I'm getting an ample number of them. Now, if I wanted to make something that was real soft and hung back tight to itself, I'd use a minimum number of these thinner big fly fibers, and I wouldn't use any of these at all. But if I want to use a minimum number of fibers and have it really be puffy, in other words, larger and easier to cast, I'm going to take some of this stuff. It's a little crinkly and it's just a tiny bit stiffer. And what I'm going to do is cut a piece maybe this long. So it's got little reinforcing ribs on it that are just a little bit shorter than my main hair is going to be. There we go. I'll just take these and pinch them together and kind of feed them through here, and then I'm just going to spread them out as best I can along the length of it. And my final product is going to be, maybe like that. As you can see, I'm going to end up with a loop in this end, and I will definitely use this right tight to this loop. The other end we're going to deal with in a little different manner, and I need some hanging out down there. Now if I want, if I'm a little askew or uneven, I can trim these right now, or I can, because you can't trim these later. Now I'm going to take this big fly fiber, and it doesn't matter if it's not exactly the same on each end, because it's going to be twisted around and it'll end up coming out kind of even. I'll just kind of open this up. You could take a little tiny bunch at a time and stick it through, but I like to just take a pile of it and hope I can get it spread out. And as you've already probably guessed, if I took another color and made longer fibers, I could make different layers. This gives kind of a, I don't know, what would you call this? A fire orange, perchy look. I think I might be able to use just a few more right up here. Sometimes a few will migrate out the top of the loop, so it doesn't hurt to have just a few. Make sure you've got it covered up here, because you're going to be using this part. If it gets thin on the other end, as you'll see, it isn't going to matter. Now I'm knocking on wood that this is nice and tight here on my pliers. And I'm going to reach down with my hook and grab this. I'm going to kind of pull it, get it started, and then I'm going to turn it. Ooh. See, that's what I was hoping wouldn't happen, but all is not lost. I'll try the big boy here, and hopefully he won't bite me off, but we'll see. There we go. I'm pulling real easy on it. And depending on what wire you're using, you can pull either kind of hard or not so hard. And just from experience, I think I'm getting close to my limit. And if you were going to be really sophisticated, you could actually put a drill on each end, where you bend your wire and so on to make a loop. Anyhow, you can see the effect. There's my dog brush. We'll take the old dog brush. Some of these hairs are sticking out, but I'm not going to use that part anyway. As I said, I wanted it to be about this long. So I'm going to go to about here. I think that'll probably work. And I think in the whole scheme of things, this guy will probably wind up facing this direction. I would have been happier. And a lot of times what I'll do is stick, and maybe on the next one, I'll stick a couple of feathers in here and just let them spin with it. And with a little bit of glue on them, they stay real good. In fact, I'll show you one like that in a minute. All right, the next thing I could do, I can pick all these fibers out of here, cut these fibers off, or burn them out, or whatever I want. If I really yank on them, I can pull them out of there. Okay. Now in this case, what I've done is I've got a couple of little sleeves here. And if I wanted to, I could cut them in half with a Dremel tool and a cutoff thing. I'm going to see how big a one I have to use before I make that decision. Now I'm going to have to use this big one. So I'm going to actually cut this in half real quick with a Dremel tool. And the reason for that is I just want to keep the hair a little more compact on here. Get the loop tighter to the hair. There we go. And crimpers always have notoriously good cutters on them. And you want to clean off all of the real scuzzy excess hair here. You take your crimp. I've got a tiny little, it's a little round nose jeweler's pliers. They come in different sizes. Start it going that way. And I'm going to bend that nicely around. bit tricky. Pretty close. This is pretty soft wire, so I can bend it pretty easily. I'm just going to take a crimper with the appropriate die. I've got a pretty good little loop in here. Now I'll just put a split ring on that to attach the next section. And this is going to be a fly section. And since this stuff is made out of nylon, it'll begin to relax in whatever direction it is you hang it in. But it will still, because of these little fibers on the inside, want to stick out a bit. So anyway, I'll leave him right there. Now there's another thing that's kind of related to this, and most fly tiers know how to do this, but it's bottle brush technology, just like this, but we're going to use a much thinner wire. This is just standard, I think, galvanized steel fly tying wire. Very, very thin wire, but standard fly tying stuff. I haven't mic'd it. We're going to do the same essential thing where we take a loop like this, but we're going to make it longer. Let's say like so. And this is where my little pliers that failed me before comes in a lot more importantly. He doesn't have to grip this quite as tightly, and it's much more likely to break off, obviously. There we go. And then essentially it's the same drill. And usually with this wire it's a little ginky, or I'll just lay the drill down here. It helps kind of keep everything off the ground. I'll bulge that one up a little so I've got room. Make sure I'm... Now as far as where the loops wind up and the whatever, this doesn't matter on this particular process. And all I've done, I just tacked it. I'm not squeezing it at all. It's just stretching. Whatever the first blob that came out kind of just stretches along. And this, I think I'm just going to use probably just use big fly fiber. Ooh, easy there, Joe. I'm just going to walk them down. It's kind of nice because the first layer just tends to grab the glue a little bit. I found with the glue, for me anyway, it makes them a little easier to spread out. And it doesn't matter if they're just perfect. It doesn't hurt either, but I think just for a little added zing. This is all big fly fiber. You can see it comes in a jillion colors. I really like this kind of stuff too, these earthy things, but for flash and real bright, you can't beat it. I'm going to put just a few strands of Flashaboo in here. Now on a fly, it's debatable whether you should use Magnum. It's usually probably better to use the regular old Flashaboo, but I'm just going to put a little bit of it in there just because. There we go. All right. Now I could leave this set here for a little bit and let this glue set up because it tends to capture any fibers that don't stick out. But I'd like to hold it right side up. What I'm looking at is just how tight it's spinning on the inside. It'll always tend to get tighter on the side toward the drill. And like I may have said before, if you had two drills spinning in opposite directions, that's a neat deal. There we go. Certainly enough for the point of illustration. This will just come off of here. You say, why not use this wire and like that? I guess you could if you didn't pull too hard, but this wouldn't probably be strong enough if you were pulling very hard. I have doubled it over, and it's not bad. But if you do that and lose a fish, I don't want it to be my fault, so it's up to you, whatever you do. All right, now what I'm going to do, I guess I could show you how to do this too. The best hook I've found for these big flies is this trocar. It's actually, sometimes we use the Siwash style of it, and sometimes they're a flipping hook. And we're usually, you know, running 2/0 to 4/0s. I don't think you need to have anything bigger than that. We want something that's light, stiff, and really sharp. And what I'll do with this, in order to accommodate the next section of the fly, and you could tie this in, but I think this is more secure. What I'd like to do is actually silver solder a little loop on it. This is .035 soft brass. This is about the same thing as I'd use if I was making a bass-sized crankbait. Cut off a little chunk like that. Take your jeweler's pliers and pick the diameter of which you want your loop to be. And then it's a simple matter of bending it around like so. The pliers just a little bit and bend it the other way. Move your pliers back. Bend it the other way. And then I'm going to cut it off quite close in here. And then you take a strong vice grip that's on closed, and then just flatten it out right on the top like you were making a hook keeper. Do the same on the other side. And where he's going to wind up is on this hook. I think that's going to be just perfect. That's just fine. I'll just take a little bit of sandpaper here and just rough this up. And then a piece of copper wire. Get it started in the right neighborhood. So I'm just going to wrap that rascal all the way back. When I get to here, I could start over, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to skip underneath it. Go back. And if you haven't been able to get it bent just right, you can wait and just solder one at a time. But you always want to put a little flux. This is stuff that makes the solder stick better. What I'm going to do is just stick this on here and melt my flux. Make sure you've got a good coating of solder. It doesn't need to take a lot. There we go. Now, as you've probably guessed, this section is going to wind up being split ringed to this section. Now, I'm not using any fancy fly tying thread. This is just good old heavy A mud hole rod building thread. I'm going to make a kind of, you don't need to make a body on this, but I'm just making something to, body of thread, that is. I'm going to quick whack a couple of big hackle feathers on this. It has a way of kind of joining the two bodies together without constricting the movement of the sections in the water. For that, you want to get some nice, if you can, maybe your daughter or your wife or your girlfriend has got some of those long feathers left over for back when these were in fashion, and it caused the price of these to like quintuple or more than that. Maybe they've got some left over, but if you don't have any, you want to get some of these nice long saddle hackles. Yeah, I'm going to just put them in two at a time probably, or nah. This isn't as critical as it would be on a bass popper or something that has to be absolutely symmetrical. And then I'm just going to position them here. There we go. Now, anytime that you're tying with thread or natural fabrics, I happen to think it's a good idea just to put a little dab of glue on it. What I've got here is a mixture of shoe glue and toluene. You just take a little bottle like this and fill it about 3/4 full of toluene and put a drop of shoe glue in it. Wad about the size of half the size of a marble. Makes the greatest glue. Now, that only takes seconds. I'm going to take this thing that we made and decide, I think I like this section quite a bit up here. This wire's really soft. There we go. I'm going to pull off about 1/4 inch of hairs here. And then I'm going to put that facing forward. I'm going to put this really quite tight. Up to there, and I think I'll tie a couple of half hitches in it real quick just to hold it. Now for this, I would not add any glue of any kind. What we're going to do is just put that at a right angle. I kind of like to blow on it and kind of get them all leaning this way. I have a feeling I could get them wet, or I could hit it with a heat gun. But anyway, you just wrap this then forward, and you don't need to get it real crazy dense or it'll get too much hair on it. The whole object of this is to give the illusion of bulk without a lot of bulk. So you don't want to wrap it real tight to itself. But you do want to kind of be combing these dogs out as you're going around the block with it. Now, if you're not a fly guy, but you like to fish bucktails for muskies, it doesn't take a great leap of genius to see that you can use this same method if you were going to tie onto a coil, or even onto a wire shaft or a cable or whatever you can think of. Now remember, I did not put any supporting hair under this one. Had I done so, it would stick out a lot more, and I did that on purpose just to show you the difference. I'll show you a finished fly in a minute that's done with all a supreme hair, or what I call bodybuilder underneath it, but anyhow. Alright. Okay, we're coming to an end of this thing. Again, being careful to work the fibers so they're facing the rear. I'll bring this up to however close I want to bring it to the eye of the hook. Some people on this type of fly like to leave the bit of the shank exposed. I'm going to do it about like that. I'll just cut this off, and then just really tight with my thumb I'm going to, and finger, twist that forward and then get it kind of evened out. I've got my thread left over here. Finish it like a regular fly, and if you wanted to, obviously I could make a big epoxy head with eyeballs on it. I could make a puffy furry muddler or diver type head on it. Could do any number of things, but that's not the point of this. It's just to show you this crazy modified method. And again, get the old dog brush. Speaking of dog brushes, this is just a that kind. You don't want a Furminator. Furminator's a much better brush for a dog, but this is better for a fly. And as you use these, if they dry out or get kind of crumbly or crinkly, all you have to do is take them in the shower with you and rinse them with cream rinse. And this big fly fiber just gets beautiful and nice and supple and soft and perfect again. Actually, it's nicer than it was when it came out of the package. So if you want to finish your flies and then bring them in the shower with you and cream rinse them, that's not a bad idea. Don't do it in the locker room where there's any guys around, though. They might think you're weird. There we go. So he's going to wind up on that little loop that we tied in there, and that's going to wind up with a split ring, and then you can just go on and on from there. Other than feathers, I choose all synthetic fibers for these flies. They don't hold water like organic materials do. I'm going to show you two other ways to construct this type of fly. The first is with galvanized wire. It's .042 diameter and it's relatively soft. It's known as soft wire. The second is .035 stainless spring type wire like you'd use in a bucktail. I've taken about 8 inches of the 042 galvanized wire and I'm putting it in a wire bender. And I'm going to make a loop on one end, like so. And then what I've done is glued little pads of rubber on there. What I'm going to do is gently pinch this down just over the top of this loop. There we go. So we got a nice little loop in this end. And on this end, we've got our existing loop and this little tag. So we're going to take this tag and just do a wrap around. And that'll lock it in place. And if I want to tie feathers on it, I can just tie feathers right here. Normally we'd put feathers on real symmetrical, but on this fly it's best to just kind of let them splay around. I'm going to start out with a few saddle hackles. I've already got a little base for my thread. I'm going to secure it really, really well right here. I'm going to wrap all the way to the front. It's a matter of simply wrapping this brush forward and trying to make sure the fibers, as many of them as you can control, are pushed to the rear so they're facing backwards. And if you wrap it very tightly, you'll get a dense section, and if you wrap it a little loosely, you'll be using fewer fibers. It's up to you. It's best to experiment and see what kind of density works best as far as castability, because that's the key. As you start getting toward the front, you want to kind of calculate where you're at and in terms of how much it's going to take to finish off the job, and I'm about there. So I'm going to go about another wrap, and I just use my scissors to cut this off. Probably not a good idea, but and then I'm going to pull the hair back like so. Kind of get that piece of wire up there. I could put a couple more feathers in here if I wanted to as well, as you can no doubt see. Yeah, it's going to fluff out real nice. And then just kind of finish it off over the top of the wire. Probably be a good idea to put a little drop of epoxy or glue on here. Any of these things mixed with toluene makes the most fantastic, flexible, waterproof cement you have ever seen. You can make it any viscosity you want, thick or thin. The greatest fly tying cement in the world, especially for deer hair. Here's one that I've finished some time ago. You can see we've got some eyes here that I've kind of gummed up with UV epoxy. Hook. This section under here where the loop of the hook is connected to a split ring. And then I've got another section of curly, another section of curly, another section. That last section also has a loop on it. You want to look real closely here. You notice the split ring? It's actually an oval. It's a really nice small split ring, and it's a 50-pound ring, so it's exactly the one you want. It's called a laser oval split ring. You can get it from Eagle Claw. So there you have it. The old bottle brush technique, call it a dubbing brush, call it whatever you want, but it's a very, very cool way if you combine it with artificial fibers, big fly fiber, and supreme hair, anything that doesn't absorb water. Don't make it too thick. And it's a big fly you can actually cast. And don't forget, you can also use it to make musky bucktails. Very quick, very easy, and different.